Do you worry about the debt at all as a young person?
Let's focus on getting the economy better, right? Isn't that the best thing to do? Like, why wouldn't we build on the economic success we're enjoying right now under Joe Biden's policies and leadership instead of stabbing ourselves in the foot and going back to Trump? The best thing to pay off the debt, let's have a great economy. Let's invest in America, right? Let's succeed. That's step number one, I would think.
Kaivan Shroff is the press secretary of Dream for America, and that organization is lucky to have him. He is smart, articulate, dedicated, and filled with conviction about being involved in politics, about fighting to make America a better place. That's why I was so happy that he was able to come on the Warning podcast. I learned a lot from listening to him, and I hope you'll listen to the conversation in its entirety. But I wanted to talk more directly about a couple of issues that came up during the interview. When I have these conversations, the point of them is not for me to challenge, not for me to assert my views over the guests. It's to listen. It's to provoke. It's to incite sometimes, but not to get into a debate. I offer my opinion on the podcasts, on the commentaries, on a frequent enough basis that everybody knows where I'm coming from. There's an issue in American life, in our politics, that is extremely important, that has always been understood to be important, and every president, regardless of party, comprehended in the moment the moral obligation to make certain the nation was never bankrupt. When the country was new, in the beginning, the United States had no credit. It was extended to us by the Dutch. The country was not wealthy. Visualize, for example, a cliff. And imagine, if you will, two ropes descending down that cliff, which is high enough to obscure the question of whether the rope is long enough to reach the bottom. Now, imagine coming across two people having a debate. The debate between them is whether they should stay where they are or descend down the ropes. And it's an angry debate, a vituperative debate. But shouldn't there be room within the debate for somebody to ask the question, is the rope long enough? That's what pragmatism is in politics. Here's how this is supposed to work with money. Objectively, both political parties, because they live in the same nation, swear an oath to the same Constitution, are supposedly supposed to be able to look at a problem, recognizing it's a shared societal issue, and come to a resolution about what measures to take to make it better, as opposed to making it worse. Now, imagine that there's an issue that needs to be addressed. The way it's supposed to work is that people with different perspectives sit around a table and decide what to do, and often that involves spending money. Now, let's say the most progressive person in the room looks at the situation and says in good faith, I think that's going to cost $1 billion. And the most conservative person in the room looks at the most progressive person and says, $1 billion, that's crazy. I think it's 1,000,000. And sitting in the center, on the center left and the center right, are two pragmatists who appreciate that everybody in the room identifies that there is a problem that must be solved, but rejects the dogma that holds it can be solved with nothing, or that every problem can be solved with 1,000,000,000. Somewhere in the middle is the solution. The problem facing America in this moment that we talked about, but no one thinks about, is this fundamental reality of the moment. There has never been a society more broke, more deeply in debt than the United States of America has been in 2024. And we're digging deeper and deeper and deeper. What does that mean when the debt of the nation is at $30 trillion, at $40 trillion, at $50 trillion? What does it mean when a trillion is added to the debt every 100 days? It took north of 200 years to reach $1 trillion in debt. And now it accumulates in piles. 1 trillion for every 100 days. What is a trillion? The number gets thrown around all the time. Everybody knows what a millionaire is. And there are 1,000 billionaires in the United States. There's a lot of them. But there are no trillionaires, at least not yet. Though there are some companies that are worth $1 trillion. It's much easier to understand the difference between 1,000,000 and 1,000,000,000 than 1,000,000,000 and 1 trillion. Maybe time is an easy way to understand the incredible levels of spending and debt that are going to beggar the young people that are going to live in America for the next 80 years. What is 1,000,000 seconds? Let's say you were to say to somebody, I'll see you in 1,000,000 seconds. What does that mean? Well, it would mean I'll see you in 12 days. Now, let's imagine saying to somebody, I'll see you in 1,000,000,000 seconds. What does that mean? What's the difference between 1,000,000 and 1,000,000,000? Well, it's the difference between 12 days and 31 years. That's the difference. 1,000,000,000 seconds is 31 years. What's 1 trillion seconds? That's the difference between 31 years and 31,000 years. 31,000 years. That's what 1 trillion is. That's how incomprehensibly big the number is. And yet the money is piled on, piled on, piled on. And so now the biggest expenditure that we spend on every year is paying interest for money we already spent, which is a type of theft from young people who have to pay for the profligacy of their grandparents at the expense of their children and grandchildren. And there has never, never, ever been one generation of Americans that has done this to the generation that has followed. So I thought this conversation was very, very interesting to hear the perspective of a young progressive. This is an urgent issue for the country. And let's understand something. America has no small government party. It has no limited government party. There are two giant spending parties in Washington, D.C. And the most irresponsible party when it comes to spending in all of human history is the Republican Party. And its fascist incarnation under Donald Trump is its most reckless spending incarnation in all its long history of spending irresponsibility. This is an important issue. George Washington would have understood this as an important issue. And so would have John Kennedy. And Franklin Roosevelt would have understood it. Every president understood this until Donald Trump. And now it seems like the train has left the tracks. And it's time to start talking about this issue. Have a watch. Do you think that Gen Z voters can be reached on political issues that go beyond self-interest, right? That we need to come out, right, and vote because we're going to get something, right? We're going to get a financial, like reward, right? That, we're for this person because this person's going to alleviate something. And that raises up a secondary issue about politics. But like, do you know what I mean by that?
I do know what you mean. I kind of find it a little bit intriguing only because I view, for example, the generation of Jamie Dimon, who's going to get up at Davos and say Trump was right about China, which is delusional, and list off a bunch of other things. And to me, that comes across as a super rich guy who wants to say extra super rich and really wants to keep those tax cuts. I view it that way. Whereas I view young voters, in fact, what are they motivated by? Sure, they don't want to get shot in school. Is that selfish? Maybe. Sure, they want to be able to access, healthcare. They want to be able to have women's rights, LGBT rights. I mean, those are all showing up for groups, allyship, coalition building. I think that's what Gen Z and millennials even are defined by. So I do see the student loan issue. That's one specific example, but I don't really know that I think there's too many more that I would pin on Gen Z specifically as they're looking for, some benefit from the government. I do think, by the way, just big picture, I mean, economists suggest, and we could debate this, I'm sure, but that student loan forgiveness raises all tides in the country. It's good for the economy. It's for us to invest in our own people. I mean, that used to be something I think people could agree on, that, investing in Americans is a good investment. So I see the point on student loan forgiveness, but you could say that about any type of loan forgiveness. You could say that about any type of government program, right? I mean, it helps some people, not everyone.
Do you worry about the debt at all as a young person? Does it register with you that the country is $30 trillion in debt? And let me give a caveat for this. This has freaked me out for a long time, right? And so full caveat here. People were predicting disaster at 10 trillion, 15 trillion, 20 trillion, $30 trillion. But now, right, you're at a point where because of spending that's gone, it's happened, right? The largest components of the budget every year, right, are the interest payments, right, on the money that's already been spent. And so country's 250 years old. Every leader in the country, regardless of party, really is a moral proposition, right? Almost like a family business. Understood, we can't beggar the country. Right? We can't steal from future generations, right, to party on today. So today, we're talking about all of these issues that cost money that will matter for your generation when the largest expenditure in the federal budget is the repayment of money spent 5 years ago, 6 years ago. I mean, there are some estimates that upwards of a trillion got stolen, right, during the COVID relief packages in its totality. Does that issue have any currency for you, for anybody your age? Does anyone ever sit around and talk about it and just look at it through the holy shit?
Yeah, so I
Mom
will say
and
I
dad,
did
stop
study
spending fucking money, right? Like that's the like type of
well,
conversation. Do they really
I don't
need to
think
have the
so,
Rolling
honestly.
Stones at the birthday party here?
I think it's interesting because you kind of mentioned that other generations understood this, but here we are. So they obviously didn't understand it too well. And I think that, what I, at least, and this could be the liberal indoctrination they're talking about happening on college campuses, but I did study economics at Brown and I went to business school at Yale. And really, honestly, I think the message is it doesn't matter. That is, I think, what a lot of leading economists think. And I think to your point, right? How many times has that been the conversation? And it doesn't seem like it's mattered. And especially when you are talking about the more urgent issues of gun violence, taking away people's human rights, all of these other things. People can't feed themselves. So, let's focus on getting the economy better, right? Isn't that the best thing to do? Like, why wouldn't we build on the economic success we're enjoying right now under Joe Biden's policies and leadership instead of stabbing ourselves in the foot and going back to Trump? The best thing to pay off the debt, let's have a great economy. Let's invest in America.
This is how I would see this issue, right? And I get partisan politics, right? I get campaign politics. I've spent a long time in political campaigns, but the reality is why do people think the economy is bad, right, when the stock market is performing and yada 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 on all the metrics? And the answer to that question is because 40% of the country, right, doesn't have $400 of cash available, right? You have an enormous percentage of people are dissociated from the concept of upward mobility, from the American dream. Thanks to Jamie Dimon, right, who, when you look at the tea leaves, right, you kind of what powers this fascist movement. One of the things it's fueled by is cynicism, right? And the cynicism of the bankers is necessary for the fascist movement to take power. They're not a leading indicator, they're a lagging one. So those comments in Davos, right, have meaning, right? But right, what is it, right, that a person who, for example, is unbanked, an enlisted person who is in the Marine Corps and has to get usury banking rates, the 27-year-old woman who's arrested for discarding the miscarriage remains in the toilet. A fundamental question: does she live in a democracy?
Mm-hmm.
She doesn't live in a democracy. Question about the economy, right, is in an environment where you have 40% of the people don't have 40%. I'm all for somebody go giving a speech like PR gave about launching a new progressive era. Um, I'm entirely supportive, right, of somebody laying out the contours of a vision about what we're going to do as a society when, right, the AI and computers and robots take away enormous percentages of jobs in a country. where the number one living wage job for a working class white guy is driving something to somewhere, right? So there's all this stuff falls under an umbrella of like, what are we going to do?
Sure.
I don't hear a lot of talk in either party, none in one. One party is just it's completely off the wall and it's no symmetry. But the only party that's left, right? Like, I don't hear it, right? Like, I don't the accomplishments that he has, I think, are fine. I think he's been a good president, right? I think this year is just like warming up on the national security stuff. But respond to that because when you talk about the next 20 years, right? Do you believe really the foundation of that is the Biden agenda, right? Or are you waiting, right, for the first like 42, 43, 44-year-old candidate, first candidate who has real currency, real resonance with your generation, a Clinton figure, a JFK figure, right? Who can connect. Like, I'm just talk to me
Yeah.
about that.
Yeah, well, I think of it in two parts. So number one, on why isn't Biden getting credit for the economy that you notice strong? I mean, that $400 statistic, it was true under the Trump administration. So we can't explain that by talking about Joe Biden or his policies. I think we can explain it by talking about the media ecosystem, frankly, that does seem antagonistic towards this administration. And I think we're seeing the same 2016 playbook unfold. But what I'm excited to see is I do think that people are hip to that. It's not going to be butthurt emails again, because we lived through butthurt emails. So people are going to call it out now, not in 2025 and say, oh, looking back, we really should have said the New York Times was doing a bad job. And I do think I give Biden credit. He got a lot of flack for saying that the media should cover the economy more fairly. But what happened a few weeks after he made that comment? They did finally point out that the economy is doing pretty well. And then what followed, of course, some perception changed and Americans started to see that it is doing well. But I think on the future vision, the future project, and actually, I'm not a fan of his presidential bid, but Cornel West was a professor of mine, and he would constantly talk about, which I agree with, this idea that American democracy, the beauty of it was this idea of experimentation and being creative with policy ideas. And we don't do that anymore that often. We don't have states trying out awesome, cool programs. I think part of that is because we're drowning right now. We just have to stabilize. We have to push out the MAGA movement. We have to fend off Donald Trump before we can actually build and invest. And I think Joe Biden's tried to do that,